Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Heather Quackenboss. I'm the Human and Development and Relationships Educator at University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension in La Crosse County. And I'm very honored to help the public library out with some presentations so we can all do some different things at home or learn how to do some new and different things in a really safe way. What we're talking about today are beans. And if we're growing our gardens, we know that beans right now are ready for us to do something with. We can either pick them and eat them, or we can start preserving them so we have them in the middle of winter when beans would be really tasty, or maybe when we can supplement our dinner with something right from our garden, which is always really exciting to be able to do. What we always recommend is the safest way to do things. So we'll have some links in the bottom and in the comments so you can look at the National Home Food Preservation page and UW Wisconsin Madison Division of Extension Food Safety page. So you have some resources for recipes and different things so you can do your things safely. So once you get all of these beans, and picking them can be amazing. It can be very abundant, and sometimes there's a few, and sometimes you have beans coming out of your ears. There are a couple ways we'll talk about how to preserve beans today. First, we can freeze them or we can can them. And there's hot and raw pack. We'll be talking about raw pack today. On the websites in the links, there will be that hot pack that you can learn as well. So for freezing beans, after you pick all of those things, first thing we want to do is clean them, cut them to whatever size you want. Generally, I do about 1 inch to 2. Some people like longer beans. That is totally up to you. Snipping the ends off. You can use those kitchen shears so kids can help a little better. I have even used a very clean just scissors when my kids were littler, and it worked pretty well to get those tips of the beans off. When you freeze them, easy to do is after your beans are washed and cut, you put them in boiling water for 3 minutes. This is called blanching. It helps stop any growth. It helps get rid of any bacteria, mold production that could potentially start happening. So 3 minutes in that boiling water, and then immediately putting those beans in an ice bath. Now here they use a pot. I tend to clean my sink really well, throw all of my ice cubes in there, put some cold water in. It needs to be 60 degrees or colder for those beans to stop that cooking process. They get nice and vibrant green, and then you can take those beans out, drain them, put them in your freezer bags or in your things that go into the freezer, and you will have beans in the winter time, and they will taste pretty fresh. They're going to be great steamed, sauteed, stir-fried, anything you want to do with those. Now, the other thing we can do is can those beans. And there's a couple ways. I showed you those kitchen cut beans that are just snipping them about 1 inch or 2 long. You can also French style cut these. Now, I have a couple issues with this. This is how my family, when I was young, used to do it. That object on the right-hand side is a bean Frencher, and it was 1 bean at a time pulling them through, and we had a lot of beans when I was a kid. I don't do French style green beans anymore because of that device. If you have more patience than I do, and if you really like French style green beans, this is certainly one option. The device on the other side is one that has a couple green beans at the same time. You also, with green beans, when you're canning, you do have to use a pressure canner. Hot water baths are not safe for green beans. The food is too basic, and you will have a higher risk of botulism. So when you're doing anything that's a little more basic and not as acidic, like beans, like carrots, you do need that pressure canner. So getting that water ready in there, you can start heating it up a little bit. When we're raw packing green beans, you want it to about 140 degrees, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But you can get that water in there, about 2 inches of water. It does not have to cover the jars like a hot water bath, so you use a lot less water, and about 2 inches covering the bottom is just fine. You will need your jars, your lids, and your rings. You wash those jars really well. You can use the quarts, you can use the pints. It is up to you or how much your family eats at one time. You may not use lids again. There are some lids that are reusable, and some research out that those are absolutely safe. The jar lids that you do buy in the stores, these are meant for one-time use for the most safety to protect you in your food for yourself. So the hardest part is getting these beans all cut. That takes the longest. Sometimes we put a movie on while we cut the beans because it just takes such a long time. So once you have those beans, you pack them down in the jars. Now, the tighter you pack them, the less float you'll have. Sometimes when you pack them down, you think you're good, and then you'll get a little bit of float when you're done. So packing them down really nice and tight, about an inch of headspace on the top, adding a teaspoon or half a teaspoon of salt, or just a little bit of salt if you want a little bit lower sodium diet. That salt helps preserve them, gives it a little bit of flavor. So you fill that with a half teaspoon or teaspoon, and then you fill that with boiling water. And that water does need to be hot to protect the beans and, of course, to be safe. So you have your salt, you have your water, and then you put that lid on. Most of the lids nowadays, you do not have to boil first, where you used to have to boil these for about a minute and then put them on. A lot of these are that self-sealing where you do not have to boil those anymore. And then those rings. This doesn't have to be insanely tight. It just has to be, hand tightened. And then what you will do is you will actually put those beans into the water before that water is boiling, about 140 degrees. The reason for this, after all of that work, you don't want that jar to crack because it's thermally shocked. And sometimes what happens is if you put a jar in that water and the water's hotter than the stuff inside the jar, you're going to get a crack around the bottom, and when you open that pressure canner up later, you're going to have a whole lot of beans and a whole lot of work that's just floating there that you can't use anymore. So keeping that at about 140 degrees, putting it in, and then letting it boil is going to be probably your best bet to save all of your beans. Now, when you use your pressure canner, after that water starts heating up, what you want to do is you'll put that on. You don't put the dial gauge, or you don't pressurize it initially. You want that to get hot enough inside until that steam is either coming out of the vent or it starts rattling a little bit. So once you put that in, you turn it on high, it starts to boil, then you will put your weight on or plug your hole so that it can start pressurizing. If you have a dial gauge, that will be 11 pounds of pressure. If you have a weighted gauge like this one here, it'll be about 10 pounds of pressure. And when that starts jiggling, so on this one, when it starts jiggling, on the dial gauge, when it starts sputting out a little bit of steam, then you know, okay, now my timer starts. And your timer will be 20 minutes for pints, 25 minutes for quarts, and you let that go. With your dial gauge, you can check that heat and you put it a little bit up or down. As long as it keeps venting and sputtering, you're going to be fine. You don't want it to get too cold because otherwise you'll need to start the whole process over again. And with the weighted gauge, it just keeps going. Once that is 20 minutes or 25 minutes is done, you remove it from the heat and you just leave it for a while. You want that pressure canner to depressurize and you want it to cool down slowly. Once that does depressurize and you removed it from the heat, when no steam is escaping, when that is at 0 pounds of pressure, you can wait a little bit longer and then you open it up. And that's when you can remove your jars to your counter, to maybe a towel or hot pads on your counter, and you let them cool. When they are cool, you check that jar lid, make sure that it doesn't pop up and down, make sure that it's sealed, and then you will have your green beans. And the color will look a little different with canned green beans because you have the salt, the water, and they are cooked. So you could potentially just eat these right from the jar, which is often what my kids do. And you can heat them up in a pan or even in your microwave whenever you would like those green beans. Now, the other thing you do want to do to make sure that there is food safety is label the date on your beans, just so you know when they were made, you know when you need to eat them by. Canned food is good for about a year on the shelf, as long as it doesn't look funny, as long as there's nothing growing in it. If there's any bulges in the jar lid, anything like that, throw that whole thing away. You don't want to deal with that. But when you label it, you do know, oh, hey, this is okay to eat. Now, if this says 2016, I forgot about a jar someplace, I'd likely throw the contents away and maybe really sanitize the jar if I wanted to use it again, depending on what that looked like. So the resources that we have, the National Center for Home Food Preservation, is a great resource to teach you a little bit more about canning, teach you a little more about pressure canners because they do sound terrible and they can be and feel kind of scary. Also, UW-Madison Division of Extension has some really good safe food recipes and alternatives to use. So you can do your own canning and preserve your own food from your garden, from the farmer's market, and have a little taste of the summer in the middle of winter. Thank you so much for watching and have a great time canning.